welcome to Through the League Lens. My name is Elisa Campbell, and my guest today is Richard Giglio, and he's here to talk about the electrical grid. But before we get started, I thought I would just remind people that last spring we taped 3 shows with other members of the League of Women Voters Energy Committee. They were on things like conservation, geothermal, nuclear power, fossil fuels, all those kinds of things. So if you didn't get to see those, or you did but you'd like to refresh your memory, they are available on the Amherst Media website. And now we're here to find out how that power gets distributed, because that's what you specialized in on the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and so we know we have high tension wires that we don't like to look at, et cetera, but beyond that, I think most of us don't know a whole lot about the electrical grid. We plug things in and turn on the switch, and
Right.
unless we have a big snowstorm at the end of October, then things happen. So
That's one of the remarkable things about the grid, is that it works so well with such a high reliability. I think that probably the best way to give you a feel for the grid is to talk about it within the context of New England, of what we have. And New England has something like 6.5 million people, and some of them, an increasing number, can generate their own electricity, at least during part of the time. And a distributed electrical system would be wonderful, but we're a long ways from having that. We have point sources for electrical power plants. In New England, we have about 350.
wow.
And this ranges from large nuclear plants to small hydro plants to wood burning to wind farms. In the 350, I'm not including individual installations on roofs. So somehow the power from those plants has to get to individual customers. And you mentioned high tension lines, and that's part of the journey is by high tension. By high tension, we mean high voltage. In New England, most of the high tension lines are 345,000 volts. So you don't want that.
That's why they're way up there.
That's why they're up there.
Okay.
Right. And you don't want that coming into your house. So the next step is to go to substations where we decrease the voltage. And you can think of one 345,000 volt line being decreased, say, by a factor of 10 to 34,000 volts. And then you have 10 lines going out at 34,000 volts. And that's pretty much what happens. Right outside the studio here on College Street, there's a substation.
Right.
And that's where it happens. And the high voltage is stepped down to about, maybe 25,000 volts.
So that's what goes to our houses?
That's what goes out to the telephone poles.
Okay.
Then in the telephone poles, if you notice these cans, those silver cans you see
Sure.
hanging, those are also transformers. And that steps it down from the, say, 25,000 volts to roughly, 240 volts.
Which is what
And that's what you get in your house.
that's what our fuses or
Exactly.
circuit
and in fact,
breakers
in your
are
house, you'll
for.
pick out half of the 240 and get 120 and
Yeah.
half and so forth. So there's this system of wires. It's not a set of tubes like the internet. It's,
Right.
It's wires. But there's a lot more to it than that. They're switches, because you have to switch current from one source or another. These transformers that I mentioned are very important because they enable you to step down the power. And even once you get it in your house, you often have transformers. You know, if you plug your cell phone in, there's that little black
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
they litter my house. By the way.
Yes, right. We have different ones
Yeah.
for everything now.
And that'll take the 120 alternating current and step it down to maybe 5 or 6 volts direct current, because that's what the battery on your cell phone wants. So the reason we have alternating current, where it goes sort of a push-pull type system, is because it's relatively easy to change the voltage. Otherwise, direct current would be far superior. Edison wanted direct current
Okay.
over 100 years ago because it's easier to transfer long distances. Most devices use direct current rather than alternating current, but that's the system we have, and that's what seems to work. So that is, in a nutshell, the grid. All these wires stepping down, down, down till you finally get it. Now, in the grid, we lose, just in transmission and distribution, about 7% of the power. Just it's just like friction in the
Okay,
wires. All right?
okay.
The reason we have...
Seven.
7, yeah.
Yeah,
just 7,
okay.
which is pretty good. The
Yeah.
reason we have these high voltage lines, you may say, why have them, is because it makes it more efficient. By doubling the voltage, I get 1/4 the loss. So if I'm transmitting electricity, let's say at 1,000 volts for a mile, if I double the voltage to 2,000 volts, I get 1/4 the losses. I can transmit it 4 miles with the same loss as 1 mile. So naturally, there's a real impetus to have high voltage. There are high voltage lines up in the 700,000 volt range, even up to 1 million.
And since most of us are not going to live within a mile or 4 miles usually of our power source, and of course, I mean, you said we have, what, 350 or something power sources,
Right.
so at any given time, the power in my house could come from many of them.
Right, it could be coming down from 600 or 700 miles from just outside Hudson Bay on a direct current high tension line from Hydro-Quebec all the way down here. It could be coming from a nuclear plant. Could be, you don't really know.
You can't look at an electron
No.
and tell where it came from.
But you can, it might be an interesting point, you can tell where power comes from. In other words, what source is. And I think maybe we can have a diagram. I hope they can add this. But I just went online a couple days ago to see where our power was coming from. That was powering my computer right there. And 69% of it was from natural gas. 18% was from nuclear. Hydro was about 7%. Now that could have been pumped hydro, really stored energy. It could have been coming down from Hydro-Quebec. It could have been small hydro.
Could be
dams.
Turner's Falls.
Could be Turner's Falls, that's right. And about 5% was in renewables. Now, the energy picture, the energy source picture in New England is really changing. In 2010, we had 45% of our power was generated from natural gas. We did use coal, but only about 10%. If you went back 10 years earlier.
It was more coal, yeah.
And we use something like 30% nuclear. So our major sources right now are natural gas is number 1 and nuclear is number 2.
And of course, we're not here to talk about fracking, but that is where a lot of that natural gas is
Right.
coming
Natural
from.
gas is currently very cheap, which is why, in fact, it's being used, and it's probably going to be cheap for some time if they can work out the problems with fracking. Right now, a lot of the natural gas comes from areas like North and South Dakota, as they're trying to open up the Marcellus Shale, where you have a lot more population. We have to be very careful that you don't end up
Right.
polluting water supplies and so
Yeah.
forth. So there's a real battle going on.
Sure, yeah, but that's not really what we're here to talk about
No.
today, so.
No.
But is it possible to expand the share of the renewables? You said it's now about 5%. There's a whole bunch of issues
Right.
involved with any of that, but with the grid, they have their own issues with grid and renewable,
Well,
right?
that's right. I mean, there is a plan that ISO New England, which is the organization that controls the grid, that I want to
Oh, yeah, we have to
expand
talk
on a
about
little
that
bit more,
too,
because that's
yeah.
kind of important. They have some great websites. If you really want to nerd it out and see what's happening at such and such a minute, you can go on their you can go on their website. But they hope to generate up to, in the next 15 or 20 years, up to 30%. They think the potential is here. New England is a great source for wind offshore, and the reason offshore, many places like in California have good offshore winds, but the water is very deep. Here we have both good offshore winds and not very deep water where you can put in towers. But then, if you do that, we're going to need more high tension lines to carry.
Coming from the places where the wind,
Yes,
where the wind
and-
is.
Or if we want to share, it's possible to share power with cities in different time zones if you want to transmit the power that far, which you can.
So if the wind's blowing when we're
Yeah.
not using so much power.
Right, or if it's, if New England is just waking up and it's 8 o'clock in the morning, people are plugging in their toasters, there's 1,000 watts, while, Cleveland is still asleep because it's earlier, well, they could perhaps switch some of their power. So there are all sorts of things that can be made, and we'll maybe talk about that in a little while, about the smart grid, which has, of course, like everything else, its own.
Right. Well, it seems like everything you say opens up a whole. So, but you mentioned ISO.
Yeah, because managing the grid is a very difficult job. It used to be that Northeast Utilities, back in, say, 1990, owned the power plants, they owned the wires, and they used to cooperate. They had organizations called NEPlan and NEPOOL, where they would coordinate with other utilities, but they were responsible for the wires that delivered it to you and the power plants. Then in 1993, I guess, or 6, there was deregulation. And in order to spur competition, they said, okay, you can't own both the wires and the power plants. So they have the wires company, which sends you your bills, and they're the retail companies, but they can buy power from whomever wants to sell it to them. And they do it literally on a minute-by-minute basis at who is willing to sell power at the lowest possible price.
Minute by minute, huh?
Yeah. And of course, there's some disagreement as to how much that has improved the cost of power. There obviously have been abuses, Enron is one. But it does give companies, the wires company, a little bit of flexibility, saying, I don't like the price you're charging, I'll buy it from someone else. But it's very hard to coordinate, because you can't say, well, look at it, to use Justice Scalia's like broccoli. The price of broccoli is too high, I just won't buy it today. You can't do that with power. You have to buy it. So there is a nonprofit organization called ISO New England, which is responsible for managing the grid. And there'll be a website on your screen that you can refer to. And you can go on that website and you can see right now what's happening, where the power is coming from, what the price is. And you can see a number of interesting things. One is that the price of power that they pay per megawatt varies a lot during the day. It might be $30 a megawatt hour at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it might jump up by $15, up to 47, let's say, dollars by noon. So there's a lot of price volatility.
Is that because the demand is, when the demand goes up, the price goes up?
Exactly, that's right. It's a classic.
It is actually
classic slot supply-demand situation.
Barring an Enron manipulation thing, but generally.
So the idea with ISO New England, and they're located in Holyoke, they have 400 employees. The idea is to have a company which is not controlled either by the generators or the wires company, which is an independent, non-for-profit company, who gets rated and judged on how well they supply power both reliably and at minimum cost. And it's a fairly impressive operation. If you go there, it looks like something from NASA, from outer space, with all the screens as they're allocating power and planning ahead and entering into long-term contracts. So that is something that, as I say, you may want to go on and
look at their website.
And look at their website.
Yeah. And then you said something about smart grid.
Yeah. One of the difficulties there are a few difficulties with electricity. One is the variability of demand. If you look, and again, if you go on ISO New England's website, you can say, gee, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the demand in New England was 10,000 megawatts. So that's like 12,000 toasters plugged in, or 12 million toasters plugged in at the same time. Then by noon, it's gone up to 16 or 17 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts. And the peak in New England, which occurred a couple years ago in the summer, was something like 28,000 megawatts, which means even though normally people may use considerably less than that, the system has to have the capacity to meet that peak demand. Okay? Because
otherwise we get brownouts.
Otherwise you get brownouts.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means that, and we being the power companies, well, I'm not a power company, the power companies cannot control demand, although they're trying to, by using a smart grid, which we'll get into in a couple minutes. So that's one problem, is the variability of demand. There's the variability of supply from traditional sources, because units can break down and they go down for scheduled maintenance. But the power companies have that pretty well in hand. There are, unfortunate events where there
Sure.
can be but the real variability in supply comes from green sources, the very source that we're trying to increase, from wind and from sun. Now, sun, it'll
We can
supply
have-
power when the sun shines.
Yeah, we can have weeks of rainy weather, then it's,
Yes.
yeah.
Now that you mention it.
Yes, right.
And the wind, too, is very variable. So the power company, even though it would, say, want to accommodate green sources, has to be able to provide backup when there isn't anything. A cloudy day when it's cold, for example, and people are turning on those who have electric heater, and whether people are using power company has to have enough reserve to handle that, which can be a limiting factor on how much realistically we can supply. Figures I've seen, and people who've worked this out, say it's going to be tough to supply more than 20% of your total energy from wind, just because of the variability. And because, this is another important point, it's very difficult to store electricity.
Uh-huh.
It's not like, what's another public system? Water. You can think of the
Quabbin.
Yeah, that's right. You
Yeah,
can store it. It just sits there, and when it rains, fine, you collect it, and then you hope you collect enough for when you have dry spells. You can't store electricity. You can't store electrons, or you can, but it's very, very inefficient in capacitors. Electricity is stored, in clouds, lightning. That's stored electricity that then discharges. But basically, to store electric energy, you have to turn it to a different type of energy. So one of the classics we have here in New England is the Northfield pump storage, where, as I think you mentioned it a little earlier, when you have excess capacity, you can pump water up a hill, and that's pretty efficient, about 90%, maybe even up to 95%. And the water sits up there in a pond, and then when you need the electricity, you let it flow back down, and it turns the turbines, and you get the electricity back. Now, there's some losses.
Yeah,
Maybe
and it's hard on the fish in the river.
it is hard, yeah, that's right. There's that whole other issue.
Right. But in
And
terms of the grid, it
in
works
terms of
pretty
the grid,
well.
It works fine. And there are a couple pump storage facilities in Massachusetts. This Northfield and one up in Florida, up in the north.
Row, there was one at Row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one way. Batteries, well, people who have home units have batteries, and they're not terribly efficient. It's amazing how much more energy, let's say, a chunk of gasoline, picture a gallon of gasoline and then picture a battery that size, even the most efficient battery. Well, the gasoline will have more than 100 times the energy.
That's why we like fossil fuels.
That's why we
It's
like fossil fuels.
compact
It's a
energy.
very convenient way to store energy. Now, once you have electrical energy, converting it to, let's say, motion can be fairly efficient. You can get 60–70% of that electrical energy can be converted to forward motion of your car, whereas gasoline engines, even the best, are very inefficient, 25%, maybe. So most of the energy, when you burn gasoline, goes out the exhaust pipe and radiator as heat.
Yeah.
But the fact that you have variable demand and variable supply, and you can't store it, makes managing the grid, I won't say a nightmare, they do a pretty good job, but it places very real constraints on how much of the alternative sources
Yeah.
you can incorporate.
So how does the smart grid come in?
Well, it's a good question. Smart grid means a lot of things to different people, but the idea is that rather than just have wires that deliver electricity when people want it, you try to control, what do? You try to control the demand. For example, in many places, you can get, there may be differential pricing. They may charge you more for electricity at 6 o'clock in the evening, which tends to be a peak time, than at 6 o'clock in the morning. And they've been doing this for years for large-scale industrial users. They now, for example, can take control of your hot water heater or your air conditioner. I know in Florida they do this. It's voluntary. But if you you can sign up for a program that says you give the electric company, they put a little box on your hot water heater, your air conditioner, and it says, we can shut that off. It's under our control. We promise not to shut it off for more than an hour at a time, and so many hours a week, so there are constraints. But if we run into a real problem and we're going to face a brownout happens when you don't have enough electricity, and it just brings the voltage down, and so the lights dim, and worse than that, that can ruin electric motors. It can ruin the motors in your refrigerator, your washing machine, or whatever. They let the power company take control. So that's a certain type of intelligence that's built in, and right now it's voluntary.
Okay.
There's also the idea of transmitting, and we do some of this now, electricity for long distances. Right now, with even our high-tension lines are 345,000 volt lines. If you transmit it for more than 200 or 300 miles, the losses become too great because you get oscillating magnetic fields. It's kind of ironic. The very thing that makes alternating current good to work in transformers, so you can change the voltage, affects the efficiency. So the idea is to have long distance lines, but direct current. When you just change it to direct current once, you ship it maybe 800 miles and then change it back to alternating current. And there's some I think the longest direct current line, I think maybe is in Brazil, it's 1,600 miles.
Wow.
The second longest is in China. We have some 800 or 900 miles.
Yeah.
There's direct current brought down from Oregon, Washington, all the way to Los Angeles for hydropower.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of the smart grid, is to say, well, there's some parts of the country, if you can move it far enough, some parts of the country are during a lull. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, and because the time zones 300 or 400 miles east, it's 7 o'clock and people are getting up, and we kind of have excess power here. Let's ship it there.
Okay. Well, we have a little over 6 minutes, so
Okay.
I don't want to leave out any. This has all been fascinating and whatever, but I don't know if there's other things you want to make sure you get to say.
I think I've probably spoken too rapidly. We've gone through a lot of it. We might talk about some of the research, things that people are looking into in order to be able to store energy more efficiently, because that's
a big issue.
a big thing if
Yeah.
we want to have more green energy. There's a lot of energy out there in the wind and in the sun. There's a lot of energy in the sun, let's say in the southwest.
Right.
And if we can store it, so it just doesn't work during the day and then you have nothing at night. If we can store it and if we can transmit it, then we really take advantage of non-polluting and non-greenhouse gas producing energy. And there's quite a bit of work going on in batteries, but I'm not sure how far that, it's incremental.
The chemistry of that might be
the
pretty.
chemistry is, and yes, they may improve it by 10% or 20% or another 50%. Lithium ion is better than nickel metal hydride, which is better. But that's it's very expensive.
Right. Well, also some of those are rare minerals,
Exactly.
which gets off into another whole
problem,
topic.
Yes,
Yes,
we have worries about countries supplying us oil, and now we'll have worries about countries supplying us rare earth. But you can store electrical energy as heat and collect it during the day, and you want to store it in some medium that stores a lot of heat. And one of the areas they're working on is to store it in salts, certain salts that will turn molten. They'll actually melt. Now,
and then you can get the energy back
and then,
out?
yes. See, when you get a phase change, when something goes from solid to liquid, that it releases a lot of heat. so you can hold more heat. Now that happens when water goes to ice, but you know, the temperature's too low.
Right.
It happens if you melt steel, but that's too high. But some molten
Somewhere in
salts,
between.
somewhere in between. And so there's quite a bit of research going on there. There's such things as storing kinetic energy, big flywheels. You know,
Like they used to use, I mean, I've seen a big flywheel at Holyoke.
yeah.
You know, I guess it was used with the hydropower and stuff
Right.
there, yeah.
Sometimes flywheels were used to sort of stabilize the speed, but the idea of your, you know, if you're using it to have a factory, you want to, when it's running your pulleys and
You
your
need it
belts.
to be a steady.
Yeah, but the idea is you put energy in, put this big flywheel and get it spinning, and then when you need the energy, you connect the flywheel to a turbine, to a generator, and you generate the electricity. So there really are, you know, many, many different ways that we can store electricity. And, you know, people are talking about big capacitors. I said it's very difficult to store electricity as electricity. Because electrons,
They want to move.
they want to move, they want to get in their orbits with their particular atoms. Then you have capacities. Most electrical components will have capacitors. But to have big ones that have very dense electrical, content is quite difficult. But there are companies and people who are, dealing with that. It's a little hard to say where some of these are going. If you keep up with the literature and you read Scientific American or the Technology Review, and there are just hundreds of companies with ideas.
Sure.
You know, you never know which one is going to
Right.
which one is going to
Right.
connect.
Is the League Energy Committee still meeting and moving on beyond? I mean, you folks put together an amazing amount of information, did a presentation. Are you continuing with this, or are people kind of taking a little break from the?
Yeah, good question. We are continuing. We've had a break the last couple of months because people are on vacation, and we're meeting next week. And I think we'll be trying to look at what our next direction will be. One thing we do want to be is sort of a source. If issues come up that the League is interested in, someone the League can go to and say, what should our position be on this? There was a very good report on biomass, on burning wood, that was done, a couple of years ago.
Or a year and a half anyway. Yeah.
And that was actually before I was on the committee, so I can't take any credit for it. But it really enabled citizens to say, is using biomass in New England a good short-term, good long-term solution? And it takes a lot of digging to do this. These are not simple questions.
Right, and they're all connected.
They're all
As we've said
Right.
today, yeah.
Right. And they're not simple. And there are a lot of competing forces, and as there should be. People really pushing for green energy,
Yeah.
people who don't want high-tension lines, going through
Right.
their backyard, which I think.
Yeah, and
Well,
all the
most
dams
of
are
us.
up for relicensing
Right,
on the Connecticut River
right,
and
that's
things like
right.
that, so.
So
Yeah.
they're people are wanting to tear down dams, and yet hydro is a very,
Yeah.
very clean source
Yeah.
of energy.
Well, I guess we're probably going to have to stop here because we just have 30 seconds or so left. But I must say, I personally was very impressed with all the work that the League Committee did. I knew the League was good at doing studies. This is a huge and in some ways ever-expanding topic, and I think, it's been a really good thing. And I hope that people will find the information on the web. I'm sure that the League can provide copies of the written report for people so that we can all be a little better informed on these very important interrelated issues. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you for having me.